We've had this sort of demonization of red meat and cholesterol going on for quite some time now. He was basically telling me how wonderful the diet is, and everybody he knows who's ever been on it has had tremendous results. We've got to change the course of where we're headed, because we're headed to a very bad place. 1 in 4 Americans are on some sort of drug for their mental health. 1 out of 2 Americans are now clinically obese, not just overweight, but obese. People over 65 are on average of 5 different medications. Where does it stop? There's no evidence that it's turning around. It's a corporatocracy, and the pharmaceutical industry sits very prominently at the head of that. It is clearly in the name of profit. When you fix your diet and you get healthy, you're like, wait a minute, this is BS. I think we can do things better. And they don't want people questioning what they're doing, I think. I am all for dietary freedom. If you want to be vegan or plant-based, go for it. What I don't like is people mandating what I can eat, because it doesn't work for a lot of other people. And it certainly wouldn't work for me. I think we need to start eating more meat and producing more meat. And, of course, we can do it in a way that's as sustainable as possible. And I think there's more work to be done in that area. I mean, you can do something about this. You vote every time you go to the store and buy something. And so if you're disgusted by that, you need to stop supporting these companies, because every dollar you give to one of these companies gives them more power over you. I do think it's important for any man or woman to understand and know how to cook a good steak. That is an essential survival skill.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the podcast, The Thought Leader Revolution. I'm your host, Nikki Ballou. And boy, do we have an exciting guest lined up for you today. It's not often that I have a guest on the show whose work has affected me in such a deep and personal way. And that's why I'm super excited to have this gentleman on the show. He is the author of the seminal book, The Carnivore Diet. He's one of the world's leading thought leaders on the importance of eating meat. And he is one of the ones who's at the forefront of standing up for our freedom to be able to consume meat going forward. I am speaking, of course, of none other than the one, the only, the legendary Dr. Shawn Baker. Welcome to the show, Shawn.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's quite an intro. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's as you mentioned. Yeah, I am definitely, like I said, I think meat is great. I think that it has a lot of benefit, but I think it's the most important thing we can do is advocate to let people eat what they need to eat. And as you know, there's been a huge push to get us to reduce, potentially restrict or even ban meat in some cases. So we've got to definitely collectively as a society say that's a big fat no. We're not going to tolerate that.
Damn straight. Before we get into that in a big way, Shawn, a lot of the folks who listen to the show are going to know who you are, but there's a whole bunch who aren't. So why don't you get started by telling us your backstory? How'd you get to be the great Shawn Baker?
Well, I don't know about the great, but my background is as a physician. I was an orthopedic surgeon for many years. I kind of had a background where a biology degree, went to medical school. Actually, left medical school to play professional sports for a few years, and then eventually came back in. I joined the military at the same time, and kind of did that. Got into private practice for a number of years, and just kind of serendipitously stumbled onto the fact that, I was about 40, I don't know, mid early 40s when I sort of realized that my health wasn't where I wanted it to be. So I started playing with diet, and found that by adjusting that, I felt tremendously, better. Applied it to some of my patients, and it happened to be a very low carb approach at the time, sometimes ketogenic diet type approach. And I started noticing that the patients were, not only were some of them losing weight, but more importantly, their joint pain was going away. The reason I had them go on the diet in the first place was to prep them for surgery, so they would be less likely to have complications for surgery. And a lot of times we just canceled their surgery because they no longer had pain. And I thought that was quite interesting. So I kind of, pursued that, and eventually started to sort of really push sort of lifestyle stuff to the point where I left orthopedics and, formed a company now. It's called Rivero, which is a digital healthcare company licensed in all 50 states, where we just, our goal is to, basically treat disease with lifestyle management rather than the typical pills and procedures. And we're having, pretty significant success with that. So I wrote a book called A Carnivore Diet, my own journey, with figuring out my health. I went through all different types of, there you go. I did all different types of dietary interventions on myself. And finally, it's kind of weird. I stumbled across this small group of crazy people eating nothing but meat, which I thought was absolutely crazy, like everybody does, right? But I was open and minded enough to try it, and I was really blown away with how much better I felt as at that time, just about to turn 50-year-old man. And, kind of the rest is history. I kind of got on social media, started talking about this. As you know, I've been on, Rogan's podcast now twice. And, now we have, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that have done this with, generally pretty darn good success. So I think there's something clearly there. And I am currently, obviously still promoting this as an option, I really think of it as a therapeutic tool. And we're finally getting to the point where we're starting to get people interested in researching this, which I'm really excited about the upcoming, next couple of years. So that's kind of the brief background.
That's an incredible background. And I'd love for you to say on air what you were telling me off the air about the difference between your first and the second appearance you had on the Rogan show, because I think that'll be illuminating for everybody listening to it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd been on this diet about a year, had a small social, a few thousand people on social media following me. And, Joe Rogan got wind of it and invited me on the show. And, at the time I didn't really realize the impact that Joe Rogan had at the time. And this is even back in 2017 before he's got as big as he is now, but he's still quite popular. And so as I can remember him telling me about this all meat diet, I think he just thought I was nuts. I think he saw this is crazy. He's a doctor, but he's crazy. I thought it was just for entertainment value. And, and so I went on the show, and then he's had some subsequent guests on the show, and then he's actually done it himself over the years. But, the initial thought was, you're a nutty guy and I don't believe you. And then I went on, just actually a week ago today, and the climate was 100%, 180 degrees reversed. I mean, this time he was basically telling me how wonderful the diet is, and everybody he knows who's ever been on it has had tremendous results. So he's been converted into someone who, thoroughly understands the value and benefit of this. And so it was fun. It's kind of nice to say, hey, look, you get it now, you've done it. Because there's a lot of people that are critical. I mean, there's all kinds of people that have criticisms. Most of them have not done it. And I think that's the difference. You do it and you say, hey, look, there's something here. I do actually feel better. And I mean, and for many people, they are able to, get off medications, and their disease processes seem to reverse. And so, it was a fun time this time.
So that's incredible. To me, one of the things that I like about Joe Rogan is he's a man who's open to changing his mind when he sees evidence. He's not one of these ideologues who's like, whatever I think is right, even if everybody all around the world says it's wrong and it can show me that it's wrong. When he sees that he's wrong about something, he changes his mind. And I think that's fantastic for somebody with his level of reach and influence. So kudos to him, and good for you that you were able to have two incredible experiences going on his show. And the second one, he was much more receptive to your message. There's a fellow I had on my show who's from Canada, where I live. His name is Dr. Tony Martin. He and his family have been running a practice in Sudbury, which is in Northern Ontario, since 1911. So I think his great-grandfather, his grandfather, himself, and his sons. And they preach a message similar to yours. And his latest book is called Sun, Steak, Steel, and Sleep. And he's the first person who turned me on to this work, a couple years back. And after I interviewed him, I talked to my coach, and he said, have you heard of Shawn Baker? I go, no, I've never heard of Shawn Baker. Who's Shawn Baker? He said, well, he wrote The Carnivore Diet. I said, that sounds like a great book. I got to buy it. So I bought it, and I read your book. And I thought to myself, Tony was a pretty smart guy. You seem like you're a pretty smart guy. So let me move off of a primarily carb-based diet, which a lot of my diet was full of carbs. I like to eat pasta and rice and dates and fruit and stuff like that. And let's go full carnivore. And Tony was talking about what he calls his great reset, which is 30 days of eggs, meat, and cheese. You only eat eggs, meat, and cheese for 30 days. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. So I started to do that and I started to feel better. And then I hired a bodybuilder earlier this year. I was 55 years old, Shawn, and I weighed 227. And I thought I need to change the way I look. This guy put me on a strong workout program and a primarily meat-based diet. And brother, I lost 58 pounds in 6 months. I was fat
Wow.
and now I'm fit. So there you go. What you say works. It's worked for me in a very personal way. And that was one of the reasons I was excited to ask you to come on my show.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really, I mean, there's all sorts of thoughts on, mechanistic reasons why something may or may not work. And I don't really care. I mean, it's important, but I mean, ultimately I care if it works or not. And we talk about evidence-based. I really talk about results-based, and I think that's really what we're all after. We want results. You can read all the papers till you're blue in the face and sort of conceptually grasp why something may or may not be helpful for you. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's either going to work or it isn't. And for the most part, with exception, it's been quite helpful for the vast majority of people that have sincerely tried it. I mean, I'm not talking about, doing it for a couple of days and quitting. I'm saying, sticking with it for a couple of months. And most people, early on, I'd taken data on about 12,000 people doing this diet. And we saw that by about 3 months. The 3 month point, most people start to, turn the corner. That's the inflection point where most people that have certain health conditions seem to see significant improvements by then. So anyway, that's, kind of like try it and see if it's worth it. See if it's for you. It may not be, but there's a good chance it might be.
The most important public intellectual of our time is Jordan Peterson, arguably, right? And he's been on a carnivore diet for at least 2 years, if I'm not mistaken. And I think
he's been on it about 5 years now.
5 years
so
now.
He's,
okay.
Because what happened was I went on Rogan and then his daughter saw me on there and she was in part inspired by my discussion. She did it for a period of time and then she got her dad to do it. So I think this all happened around 2017, probably 2018 is probably when he started, I think, in earnest. So yeah, I mean, so he's been on it probably 5 years and yeah, he's obviously it's helped him clearly. I mean, it's kind of interesting because he reluctantly would talk about it early on, right? He was like, I don't really want to talk about that stuff. But now he is, really more open to a full-throated endorsement of what it's doing. And he sees, because I think just like the rest of us, he sees the grave problem we have in society with, mental health, physical health, and much of it, in fact, probably the majority of it stems from are just awful diets. And so I think he's starting to see that, hey, we've got to, like I do, we've got to change the course of where we're headed because we're headed to a very bad place with just mental health. And it's, when 1 in 4 Americans are on some sort of drug for their mental health, that's a scary proposition. When 1 out of 2 Americans are now clinically obese, not just overweight, but obese, that's a real problem. When people over 65 are on average of 5 different medications, it's just, where does it stop? I mean, where do you say enough's enough? And I think we're beyond that, my point.
Well, you're right about that, Shawn. I mean, that's a whole different topic, but the pharmaceutical industry seems to have co-opted the political class to the point where a lot of the public policy decisions these days are being made for the benefit of the pharmaceutical industry and to push more and more drugs on more and more people. The whole scamdemic, in my opinion, was something that was pushed to increase Pfizer and Moderna's sales by tens of billions of dollars. And a whole lot of the drugs that folks are taking, I think, are intended to addict them so they keep taking drugs for the rest of their lives. These guys are the real drug cartels, as far as I'm concerned.
If you look at like any chronic disease, and can you name a drug that has reduced the incidence of that chronic disease? There's none. They're just to support. I really call it, we went from, the art of medicine to the business practice of disease management. And I really consider it disease maintenance because all we do is maintain these people in some level of sickness and medicate their symptoms at enormous profit. I mean, U.S. healthcare system, probably close to $5 trillion now. A few years ago, it was $4.3 trillion a year we spent on healthcare. The majority of it chronic disease. And in the United States, we get very little in return for it. I mean, we have one of the sickest population. Well, we are the sickest population we've ever had in our country. Our life expectancy is going down. There's no evidence that it's turning around. It's just awful. And yeah, I mean, but the pharmaceutical companies are making hundreds of billions a year in profit. And yes, of course, there are politicians that are benefiting either directly or indirectly from that. So yeah, it's a corporatocracy, and the pharmaceutical industry sits very prominently at the head of that, or at the very top of that.
Absolutely. And here's another thing that I think we all got to understand. If you look at photos of families back in the 1960s and 70s, you see people looking, slim and trim. If you look at photos of people in the 2010s and the 2020s, you see the average family is morbidly obese. It's crazy. Why is that? Well, a big reason is because people changed their diet. They stopped eating as much meat because meat was demonized. Oh no, it's going to give you high cholesterol, and that's bad for you. That's a terrible thing. When did that actually become a thing, that high cholesterol in and of itself was a bad thing? And secondly, they just keep pushing carbs down everybody's throats and processed foods. How can you say stay trim if you're eating things that are meant to make you fat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as far as the demonization of cholesterol, that probably goes back to at least to the 1950s. I mean, we first started looking at the impact of dietary cholesterol on heart disease back in the early part of the 20th century, 1910-ish or so, when they did investigations on rabbits and whatnot. Obviously, rabbits they're herbivores, they're not designed to eat cholesterol, but nonetheless, that's where the early work came from. But really, with the 1950s, with the heart attack of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, that sort of catapulted. We were going through a bit of a heart disease a crisis at the time, and so they were desperate to find causes for that. And then, of course, we know the scientist Ansel Keys was instrumental in sort of pushing forward this so-called lipid heart hypothesis, which was very much a theory and was not really accepted by the vast majority of the scientific community. But it was sort of, strong-armed through basically some political stuff. I know that the sugar lobby really sort of did some shady stuff back in the 60s to sort of, put fat as a boogeyman and sort of exonerate sugar to a degree. And so we've seen that. And then, of course, we have this entire nutrition science, industry, basically, that was basically founded by religious vegetarians, the Seventh-day Adventists, back in 1917 with the advent, or with the formation of the American Dietetics Association, which was formed by Lena Cooper, Seventh-day Adventist, and her partner. So yeah, I mean, we've had this sort of demonization of red meat and cholesterol going on for quite some time now, and what you mentioned is absolutely true. That when you remove animal products from your diet, whether it's butter, i.e., you replace it with margarine, or meat, and they replace it with some sort of ultra-processed food. That is clearly 100% what happens. That is the reality of what happens. When you reduce animal products, you consume more processed food. Great for the processed food company because it's enormously profitable for them. Great for the drug industry because it's enormously profitable for them. But this is what we see. And I think this is one of the major drivers of this push. It's not to save the planet due to climate change or any interest in protecting your health. It is clearly in the name of profit that they do this.
It is in the name of profit, and that's what makes it disgusting. And, in the last few weeks, there have been a lot of people that are starting to stand up, prominent people. They're starting to stand up and give a big FU to the powers that be around some of the narratives they're pushing on us. I mean, you saw Elon Musk last week telling the folks that are leading an advertiser boycott to go F themselves. You saw Dana White.
Yeah. So Dana White doing the same thing. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of F-bombs being dropped, right?
And
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think many of us feel the same way, right? I mean, that's what we all want to say to these people because we are tired of it. And I think it's obviously they're all multi-millionaires, billionaires. In Musk's case, almost a trillionaire type of thing. So. It's a little easier for those guys to do it, but they also have a lot to risk, and I applaud them for finally staying in. And I think like when I went on Rogan, I told Joe, hey, look, I really appreciate and thank you for what you're doing by giving the common man a voice and letting, and not being coward, because so many people in the media, so many celebrities cower down to this stuff. We see it all the time. You see, what was the
John Cena, John
Cena. Yeah. Yeah, John Cena going there and groveling because he, I mean, it's pathetic, quite honestly.
It is pathetic. But what happens when you see guys like Rogan, guys like Dana White, guys like Tucker Carlson? There was a little clip that Patrick Bet-David put on Instagram of Dana White, um, Elon Musk, and Tucker Carlson dropping F-bombs to the powers that be. And what happens when people with that level of prominence doing that, when they start to do that, the average person who's feeling a little nervous, feeling a little scared, but also sick and tired of all the crap that's being shoved down his throat, he starts to feel a little bit more courageous, and he's going to start to stand up. In Canada, Shawn, 3-4 months ago, the media started pushing the narrative of, oh, there's another COVID pandemic coming here. And I'm telling you what, people who last time were, okay, we'll follow what you say, we trust you in the government, they started to stand up and say, F that, no freaking way. You're not going to tell us to lock down. You're not going to keep our kids at home. And the whole narrative died down within 3 weeks because the powers that be could see that if they started this, there was going to be an insurrection on their hands. And one of the reasons I think they're pushing people not to eat meat is because when you eat meat, it raises your testosterone. You're naturally a little bit more aggressive. You're naturally a little bit more don't tread on me in your attitude toward life. So when you take meat out of people's diet, their testosterone goes down. They become meeker. They become milder. So I think it's good for you to eat meat as a way to say F you to the man too. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting topic, and whether it raises testosterone relative to something else is debatable. But I would say that, yeah, I mean, I think that it is, when I wrote my book, I talked about that in the prologue of the book, or the epilogue rather, that this is considered a revolutionary act these days. And it's almost like the Boston Tea Party, where we're just saying, I'm going to do this and stick it to the guys that are telling me I can't. And, but I mean, honestly, when you think about like countries that have internal strife, or people where they actually overthrow the government, not that I'm calling for that, but
not at all.
It's usually a hungry population, a population that is, just so frustrated. And what we have right now is a pacified population. These people they're so apathetic and lazy, and they've been fed junk food and fed junk media. So all they want to do is sit there in front of their TV and eat their cookies and ice cream, and as long as it's cheap, and have somebody take care of them. And I think you've got a large segment of the population that falls in that category, where they're just so damn complacent and so lazy that they're just too tired to do anything. And when you fix your diet and you get healthy, you're like, wait a minute, this is BS. I'm very independent at this point. I think we can do things better. And they don't want people questioning what they're doing, I think.
No, they definitely don't. And what you're saying is 100% true. If you go read George Orwell's book, 1984, in it, he talks about how the modus operandi of the regime at the time was to feed people, like pab them, to keep them kind of sedated and have them looking at screens all day so they don't notice what's going on around them. And wouldn't you know it, 1984 is happening now in 2023, because everybody's got these tiny little screens that they stare at for 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And they're eating food that prevents them from thinking clearly. I also think sleeping is an important part of the issue as well. If you're on your screen for 2, 3, 4 hours before you go to bed, it's going to be hard for you to sleep properly, because that blue light's making your brainwaves go crazy. So you get up feeling tired. And when I'm feeling tired, I don't know about you, Shawn, but I don't think as clearly as when I'm well rested. So people need to eat better. They need to put their devices down, and they need to stop listening to what people have to say to them from the powers that be, because if you outsource your thinking, you're done. You're toast. You're never going to live a life that you're going to be happy with. I think the most important thing we can do is think for ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with the device. I try to make this point on Rogan's podcast, not as good as I would like to, but I mean, like I said, when I grew up, I don't know how old you are, Nikki, but I'm 50. Yeah, I'm 56 too. So we grew up at the same time. When I was a kid, everybody watched the same thing. I mean, there was just a few TV stations. You kind of watch the same thing, you're exposed to the same thing. And so, the message was what the message was. But now it has become highly contoured. And I mean, it's like, just by looking at your devices, they basically control what they want you to think, more or less, because of what they show you. And if you react to something, they play upon that, and they keep showing you more and more of this stuff. And so it ends up dividing people, and you get these people that are so divided now, ideologically or politically or whatever, dietarily. And I think that, again, it's one of those united we stand, divided we fall type of situations. So we have a very divided populace. We have a very complacent populace that can't really do anything. And, yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's because there's so much inertia there you fight amongst yourselves online, you snipe at each other online. That's where your energy goes, when really something more constructive be done with actually changing policy, actually having a government that actually works for us and as opposed to perhaps against us in many ways. So yeah, it's frustrating.
There's no question about it. But I think the message that meat is good for you is one that a lot of people will instinctively gravitate toward. So I'm really glad that you're doing what you're doing. And, in the book, you have tons of case studies of people that have gone on a carnivore diet and what it's done for them. And what I love to see about that is that, in particular, there seem to be a lot of women that are embracing eating the carnivore way, because in the past they weren't. My lady is a 3-time Guinness World Record holder. She set 3 world records for running 12 hours on a treadmill. She was vegan for many years. As soon as I finished reading the carnivore diet, I said, honey, you got to start eating beef. I'm telling you, this is going to change your life, blah, 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 blah. And she was super skeptical at first, but she's eating beef now, man. She's eating hamburgers a few times a week. So I think that's a beautiful thing. It's great to see women embracing this.
Yeah, it's, you mentioned that there was a friend of mine who is a 400-meter world champion, masters athlete, who's very pro-carnivore. She took a gal who was a world champion plant-based runner. I can't remember the distance she was competing. I think maybe 800 meters or something like that. And she got her eating beef, and now she's just blowing away her own records. I mean, she's gotten so much better as an athlete by doing that. And so it's, like I said, I am all for dietary freedom. If you want to be vegan or plant-based, knock yourself, go for it. If it worked for you, it worked for you. What I don't like is people mandating what I can eat, and because it doesn't work for a lot of other people, and it certainly wouldn't work for me. But some of these people that, despite a diet that's probably a little bit deficient, are able to achieve pretty good things, shows you how resilient humans are and how tough people are. But when you start feeding them appropriately, gosh, they just get so much better. It's really amazing to see.
So Shawn, let's come to that point of the folks that are trying to tell us what we can and can't eat. These are the people that, let's face it, are socialists or totalitarians. They want to take away all freedom of choice. And lately around the world, I've been heartened to see a massive backlash against that sort of thinking. I mean, in Argentina, you had the first libertarian candidate be elected president. And there's a rumor that Argentinian beef makes the best steak in the world. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what I've heard from a lot of people. I got to fly down there and actually check it out for myself. But Javier Milei, he said that we all need to stand up against these people. He calls them those little socialist, rhymes with hits. And he says, you can't give them an inch. You can't give them even 1 inch. And I think those of us that are meatarians, that are practitioners of carnivore diets, we can't give these people an inch, because they're going to try to use every argument in the book. Oh, it's better for the planet. Oh, it's inhumane to kill animals to eat them. Oh, it's you fill in the blank. If we give them even 1 inch, if we concede the argument to them even one bit, they're going to take a mile, and they're going to have us eating bugs, and inside of 10 years, we can't let that happen, not even for 1 second.
Yeah, I agree with that, not taking an inch. And we've already given up many inches. I think we need to go back the other way. I think we need to start eating more meat and producing more meat. And, of course, we can do it in a way that's as sustainable as possible. And I think there's more work to be done in that area. But you're absolutely right. I don't concede anything, because this is what they have. You see this. They propose absolutely preposterous stuff that, like, no one's going to. Then they what they're really looking for is some sort of compromise, and they're very smart about this. It's not they're never going to come out there and say you are not allowed to eat meat, right? But what they're going to do is make it so difficult for the ranchers to sustain a livelihood. Maybe make it extremely expensive so most people can't afford it. That is the play that's going to actually have efficacy. If they came out and said we're going to ban meat, you're going to get uprising. But if you just slowly boiling the frogs, it's like, well, it's going to go from, $10 a pound, or, $20 a kilo, to now $23 a kilo, and on and on and on. And then more ranchers go out of business because they can't sustain the increased regulatory stuff that's put upon them. So yeah, I mean, it's we have to watch this. So I think you have to say, look, we need to look at how much meat is being produced every year and try to increase that, in my view, particularly beef. I think beef is such a wonderful, Canadian beef is wonderful. You got the whole great, Alberta and Manitoba, Saskatchewan, that are all places that can produce tons of meat. Not that there's other places that can't, but I mean, you need to preserve that. And I know some of the Albertans have pushed back against what's going on in Ottawa, and they're kind of like, it's good to see, and our ranchers need support more than ever. In the United States, a lot of people were up in arms about what was going on in the Netherlands, and you saw the elections in the Netherlands where they really pushed back, and they installed or elected a pro-farmer government in there, because they had the audacity to think they were going to shut down 3,000 farms in the Netherlands. Well, in the United States over the last 40, 50 years, we've lost 500,000 ranchers in the United States, which, I mean, most people don't realize that. 500,000 ranchers have gone out of business. In the 1970s, we had something like 1.3 million ranches in the United States. We're down to 700,000 now. So it's been, it's a real problem. And like I said, we need to, again, stop paving over, agricultural land with, malls and strip malls and business zones. We need that. I mean, this is what feeds us. I mean, literally, if we can't get good nutrition, and I don't believe for a second that we can make this, everything grown in a factory is good nutrition. I reject that premises, and I don't think that's, I mean, yeah, we can survive maybe, but very sick, very weak, very diminished, and I don't want to see, I've got, children at home, and I don't want to see their futures being compromised in that way. So it's up to us to fight for it,
We do. The great Irish philosopher Edmund Burke said, the only condition necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to stand by and do nothing. Hell no, not this good man, and definitely not you, and definitely not millions and millions of us. We got to stand up. We got to eat more meat ourselves. We got to push back against the forces that are trying to take this away from us. And the climate alarmists are pure evil. They're pure evil, and we need to stop them. I'm not saying that we should do things to harm our planet or our environment. Not at all. Don't get me wrong. But those people that are using that as an excuse to take away our freedoms, they don't care about our planet. They care about having control over you. Don't allow that to happen. Good men and women fought, bled, and died, so we have the freedoms that we have today. We need to maintain them. 1,000%.
Yeah. It's you mentioned about, one of the arguments is a climate argument, which I think is, again, bogus in regard to, animal agriculture driving any of that or any significant amount of that. I think it's complete nonsense. And then the argument about animal welfare type stuff. And it's clear that if you're going to eat any food, it doesn't matter what it is, you are going to do that at the expense of animals dying. I mean, there's no way around that. In fact, many diets, omnivorous or plant-based diets, cause greater loss of life and loss of biodiversity than you would if you were to focus your diet on a grazing animal, particularly one that's raised in a regenerative fashion. That's going to have the least impact on animal suffering and the best animal welfare overall. But people just sort of turn a blind eye to that because it's convenient for them, and they think they can have this guilt-free meal if I just don't eat meat. But there's nothing farther from the truth than that.
It's interesting you mentioned a regenerative raised animal. Would you mind getting into that more? Because I had a regenerative farmer on my show just about a month or so ago, and he's the fellow who even introduced the term to me. Would you mind explaining what that is for folks?
Yeah. So, when we look at how animals usually interact in the wild, I mean, there's a very specific way that, animals have co-evolved with their environment. We have these large grazing ruminant animals. You can go look at the savannas of Africa, for instance, where you have these giant, enormous herds of wildebeest and, predators, and the predators are there, and it causes the animals to move. And so they're constantly on the move. They're constantly eating some of the forage, some of the grass, and then they're pooping all over the place, putting down fertilizer, and then they move on. And then that that allows, the rest of the ecosystem to evolve. Whereas our food system is basically, in a way very destructive because, with plant agriculture, we the vast majority of our food comes from these monocrops where we just basically go in there and completely poison the landscape, kill every living creature that lives there, so that one species, one particular plant, whether it be rape, canola or soybean or corn or wheat or strawberries or tomato, it doesn't matter. I mean, we just kill everything else, so that's the only thing that grows there. So we have a tremendous loss of ecosystem diversity. It's completely gone. The insects die. In the United States, we kill literally every year with pesticide use. It's estimated we kill something like 4 quadrillion, not a billion, not a trillion, but quadrillion insects every year, which you think, well, they're just a bunch of insects, but these insects are also important for our ecosystem because that feeds the birds, which, it's just, the bees are being killed. And so it all has an upstream effect. So a regenerative system, the goal is to sort of recreate what nature does. So instead of the predator moving the animals around, the farmer does. He just takes his animals and he lets them graze in a pasture for a day, and then he moves them on to the next pasture. And that has a tremendous impact in, restoring that biodiversity there. So when you look at a field that has been grazed regeneratively, it's full of life. There's bees, there's birds, there's insects, there's, beetles and worms and diverse microbes that are allowing for the root system to develop, and the water retention is better, so you don't have all the runoff that you see in these places that are overgrazed. Even a grass-finished system where the cows are just let out to roam on their own can be relatively destructive because the cows will naturally just eat down to the dirt, and you don't want that to happen. So you have to move these animals. And so without the predators there, the cows don't want to move because, they just like eating the stuff they enjoy. And they'll eat the good stuff all the way to the dirt. They won't graze anything else. But if you move them continuously, then they're not doing that. And so they don't have to use any pesticides. They don't have to use any herbicides. And so those are other things that, that ends up in our food system. It ends up in our water supply. So a regeneratively raised food system is clearly better for human health, clearly better for the environment. It's clearly and can be a very good way to increase the stocking rate of the productivity of land. You see people that take land that can maybe support maybe their 100 acres can only support 20 head of cattle. They regenerate it for a few years, and now they can support 100 head of cattle. So the productivity of the land goes up 3, 4, 5-fold in many cases. And then on top of that, they can also do multi-species grazing, where they not only run the cows through there, and then they follow it with the chickens, and then they follow it with with the sheep and the pigs and things like that. So it's a way in which we can produce probably just as much, if not more, food potentially, in a way that's works symbiotically with nature and the landscape, and how we should probably be doing. We should subsidize that, quite honestly, because right now, the USDA, and I don't know what, the Canadian equivalent, but the USDA, just like the FDA, is subject to corporate capture. It's subject to conflict of interest. People that work for the USDA, where do they go when they leave the USDA? Well, they get a golden parachute executive job at one of these giant food companies, one of these giant PepsiCo and Nabisco and Nestle. So again, it's all set up to promote those types of food. And where do those foods come from? Again, it's this industrial monocrop system. It's the equivalent of printing fiat food. I mean, you can just crank out all this cheap food, cheap calories, at enormous profit. And, that's, it makes the shareholders happy, but it makes the rest of society sick.
That is disgusting. One of my friends, a former client of mine, was talking about microplastics and how those are now omnipresent throughout so much of the food supply. Is that something you've run across in the work and research that you do?
Well, I mean, there certainly is some level of microplastic. I have not greatly looked into that, but I mean, it has to do with the fact that our oceans are filled with plastic. I mean, this is more of this, we've got plastic everywhere in the environment, so it ends up in our food supply, and it ends up, you do blood samples on people, and you'll find microplastics in them. Back to my initial point, but you said it's disgusting. But I mean, I think what most people need to realize is that, you can do something about this. You vote every time you go to the store and buy something. And so if you're disgusted by that, you need to just stop supporting these companies, because every dollar you give to one of these companies gives them more power over you. And it's as simple as that. I mean, if you don't like what they're doing to you, stop supporting them financially. And I mean, you can make better choices. I mean, it's clear, but you got to. One of the problems is so many people are addicted to this stuff. These foods are designed to addict us just like drugs addict us. And approximately 14% of the population is identified as having food addictions. And it's probably a greater percentage, quite honestly. And so, how do you give up food addiction? Well, you've got to go cold turkey, just like you wouldn't tell an alcoholic, just have a couple shots a week. That's not how they're going to get over that. No. So you got to go cold turkey, cut all that stuff out. And that's why a carnivore diet has been so incredibly effective with people suffering from food addiction. But I mean, honestly, if you want to change this system, we've got to take away power from the people that are doing these things in a sort of, kind of very malevolent way, and support the people that you want to support. And it's as simple as that.
So if somebody wants to embrace the carnivore way of life, Shawn, walk them through how they can get started with this, especially somebody who has never done it before, but they're sick and tired of being sick. Maybe they're looking, it's the end of 2023. They want to start a new leaf in 2024. That was me last year at this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, conveniently, every year on January, I do World Carnivore Month, where I try to convince people for the month of January, 31 days, just go carnivore. And we've had, Rogan's doing it again this year, and we've had tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people have joined us every year, and most of them find that their health has gotten significantly better. But, of course, I wrote a book on the topic, which kind of is, very detailed on what might be helpful. But I mean, the short answer is, I think there's a couple things that you have to do. I mean, obviously you're eating animal products. You got to find something you enjoy, if you see it's kind of crazy and silly when I see people doing this. You see some people advertising a carnivore diet as you got to eat all this raw liver and raw testicles and all this craziness. And it's just totally disgusting. No one needs to do that. That's all for media clicks and selling supplements and absolute nonsense. Find something you like that's, animal based, hopefully you've got some red meat in there. I mean, I think that's really a very important part of this, whether it's beef or lamb, ground beef or steak, if you can afford it. You might want to add some eggs to that. Dairy products are something you can use sparingly. Some people do okay with it. Some people have to restrict that, but just get used to the idea of filling your plate with lots and lots of meat and animal products, and start eliminating the fruits and the vegetables and the grains and the breads and the starches and the rices and the pastas and things like that and the cereals. And you'll be surprised that, the way I started, I just had steak and eggs for breakfast for one meal, which is not an unusual breakfast. I mean, people eat that, but I found out that, if I ate enough of that, I just didn't want to eat anything else. And so I tell people, because they're like, well, how much do I need to eat? And, I weigh this much. And, I don't worry about that in the beginning. I tell people, eat enough meat and animal products so that you don't want anything else. So you don't want cupcakes or pizza or cookies or anything like that. Just eat enough, and you might have to eat quite a bit. You do that for the month. Make sure you stay on top of your hydration, because anytime you go on a low carb diet, there's some level of loss of fluid and electrolytes, because your insulin levels typically come down. And when our insulin levels fall, we tend not to retain as much salt and water. So you might have to replace that a little bit so you don't get headaches and, things like that. Realize that your bowel habits will change a little bit, because you go from, it's weird. You buy all these expensive organic fruits and vegetables. Most of it your body can't absorb. Most of it ends up in the toilet. You go to the bathroom, you eat all this fruits and vegetables. You have 3 or 4 bowel movements a day in many cases. On carnivore, it's very different, because everything you consume gets absorbed like we're designed to. I mean, this is what we're literally designed to consume meat. And so you may go from having a bowel movement 2 or 3 times a day to having a bowel movement once every 2 or 3 days initially, and it's something that there's a transition period. And so those are some things to be mindful of. There are all kinds of online groups now that you can join that are doing carnivore challenges all the time. I have another website called carnivore.diet. I'm there every single day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, unless I'm on a plane or something like that. Talking to our group and trying to give them support, because it's helpful to have a supportive environment, just for motivation, for accountability, and then for questions that might come up. Because, some people have, well, what about this? What about this? This happened to me. And there are things that happen during the transition that sometimes people need more of a clue on what's going on, And so I will say that if you are particularly sick, if you've got a lot of health issues, you're on a lot of medications, it probably makes sense to realize that you may have to come off of some of those medications. If you're a diabetic, your blood glucose may start to drop pretty dramatically. So you might need to cut back on some of those medications. So you need to do that under the supervision of a healthcare provider, of course.
Yeah.
But, those are some things to just keep in mind. And like I said, it's fortunately more and more physicians are starting to sort of embrace this. It went from me being the crazy guy, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, talking about this, to now there are literally thousands of physicians out there that are sort of, on board with this, at least to some degree for some conditions. Again, our company, Rivero, has all of our physicians get it, and we use carnivore as a treatment option when needed. Not always, but when needed. I think it's a great tool.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of other docs that are jumping on the bandwagon these days. Tony Martin's a fellow who's been doing this for a long time here in Canada. I don't know if you know Tony, but you and Tony should.
I don't know. I don't recall the name. Yeah, unfortunately.
If you'd like, I'll make an introduction. He's got a podcast as well, and he talks about these issues. He's always pushing the reset and eggs, meat, and cheese, and sun, steak, and steel, and sleep, and all that stuff. He's an older fella. He's in his late 70s, but his son is running the clinic. They've been saying this since 1911, man. So these guys they've been on your side for a long, long time. Northern Ontario, God bless them, out in the nickel belt. Good guy, though. Really, really good guy. I think what you're doing is amazing. I think it's great. More and more people need the message, so I'm glad you came on the show. So before we sign off, Shawn, let's talk about some great steak dishes, because I'm a big fan of steak. I'm a big fan of eating this way, and I'd love to banter with you a little bit on this, if you don't mind. So I've become a real fan of cooking on cast iron. So I bought myself a bunch of Lodge cast iron skillets. And what I do is I use beef tallow to kind of grease the skillet a little bit, and then I'll toss on a steak. My favorite two types of steak to eat are a nice juicy ribeye or a strip loin steak. It's hard to cook a big tomahawk on these cast iron puppies. I'm going to need a barbecue for that. But that's kind of some of my favorite ways of making the meat. It's very satisfying to cook it the old-fashioned way, and I think it tastes better too. What's your favorite steak?
Honestly, a ribeye steak is probably my favorite, just because, you can't beat that fat, the combination of fat and flavor, and just, it's just wonderful. And I also like those New York strips. I had 3 New York strips for breakfast this morning.
Nice.
One of the things with the cast iron, and cast irons are great. I mean, you get them, but you got to get them, as you know, you got to get them super, super stinking hot, and then that tallow is pretty good because it can tolerate that high heat. It's a good cooking fat. One of the things that, I find a lot of success when I do cast iron, I do from time to time. The problem is it kind of messes up the kitchen, and, and I get, the wife is like, the kitchen. So I'm usually out on the patio cooking on the barbecue. But the other thing is, having even pressure on there. So high heat, and I like to use a little steak weight. So I'll put a little weight on there to weight it down. So you get that full sear contact. That improves the sear, in my view. And then, some people like to do, finish off with a little butter based, that's plus or minus if you like that. But, and then of course, there's the reverse sear technique where, you prior to searing, you kind of bring it maybe in the oven at a low temperature up to, internal of, maybe 10 degrees below what you want it to. So if you like it at 130 Fahrenheit, I can't remember the equivalent for Celsius for you guys, but 130 Fahrenheit, medium rare, you cook it just underneath that in the oven. And then you put it in there for that quick sear. The quicker you can get it hot and seared, the better. The more juice stays in there, and it's just such a wonderful. And the ribeye is a great one to cook because that fat on the fat just renders out so nice on a ribeye. It's such a nice even flavor. And I agree, cast iron can be a wonderful way. I personally, just because one, I don't like cleaning the kitchen as much, so I often will I've got a sous vide device, so I'll throw it in the sous vide.
Those are great too.
And then I'll just, it's ready for me whenever I want it. And then I throw it, then I've got a grill that goes up to 1,500 degrees outside. So I throw that sucker in there, and it's super, super nice sear, super fast. So that's how I do mine typically. I'll do, I'll smoke some meats, I'll smoke briskets and smoke some tri-tips and things like that. Those are fun. And brisket. But I do think it's important for any man or woman to understand and know how to cook a good steak. That is an essential survival skill.
I agree.
And because, when I grew up as a kid, my mom, I don't think my mom could cook, to be honest. I mean, that was not her forte. She was a tiny, I'm a big guy. I'm 6'5", 260 pounds right now. She was a tiny little woman and thought food was a waste of money. I'm like, whoa, wait, Mom. I disagree with that pretty vehemently. And so, if you bring your kids up eating chewy, dried out, overcooked steaks, that's a problem. You're doing them a disservice. Teach them how to eat a nice, well-cooked, medium rare, just delicious. And, a good steak, good cut of meat with a good cook doesn't need much. I mean, just a little salt's all I need. Maybe some people want salt and pepper, but the good meat should not require all kinds of salt. Because when you overcook meat and you dry it out, then you got to put all those sweet, and all these sauces on there to kind of make up for your mistake. Cook the meat properly from the beginning, and it's so much easier. It tastes so much better too.
I wholeheartedly agree. I have a 17-year-old son, Shawn, and I got a 15-year-old. My 17-year-old is steak happy, steak crazy. He loves eating the stuff. I've taught him how to cook with the cast iron. So I'm one of these dudes who just has to get everything right and perfect when I decide to take something on. So I cook with the cast iron. I clean it properly. I don't use soap on it. I basically grease it with some avocado oil afterward. Right now, I'm trying to figure out if we can find a way to grease it with the tallow. We probably could, but the guys at Lodge say use something like avocado oil, but maybe I'll start using tallow now that I think about it.
I think tallow works fine. I mean, it's it's all you're doing is putting a coat of oil in there. I mean, it's whatever. Tallow's fine. It's very stable. I see no reason why you can't. And I've done that with mine. I usually do that with mine. So
sold. I'm going to start using tallow. That's it. That'll be it. We'll get rid of the avocado oil. So I put it all away, and it just is gleaming every time. I've got an 8.5 inch, an 11 inch, and a 17 inch. I take the 17 inch outdoors with a bunch of kids. My son's soccer team. We've taken them outside. We cook a bunch of meat for them and we eat it. It's a fantastic way to eat. I love cleaning the stuff. I find it very soothing. My lady's not crazy about the smell. So after I cook, winter or summer, it doesn't matter. The windows come open, the fans start going to push all that smell out of the house. Otherwise, I'm in trouble. But I'll tell you what, it's the greatest thing in the world for me. And I'm going to try the cooking in the oven. I haven't done that, but I think that should be a neat thing to try. Just cook it to 100.
Just get a meat thermometer. Just get a little meat thermometer and run it up to whatever, about 10 degrees less than you want it. So when you sear it, it'll cook a little more. Here's another one, a fun one to do. There's I'll take a standing rib roast. Like a 5-pound prime rib.
Yeah.
You do that for like Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that, and you throw it in the oven at 500 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 minutes per pound. So if it's a 5-pound steak, you put it in, and you'll have to convert it to kilos and all that stuff. But a 5-pound steak, you put in for 25 minutes, 5 times 5. And then once you finish that, you just turn the oven off completely. I even go shut the circuit breaker off so the fan doesn't even run. So it just sits there and you leave it in there for 2 hours, and that's it. I mean, then you got a perfectly, prior to that, I coat it in salt. So I take a nice coarse, like a kosher salt, cover that thing up in a coarse kosher salt, 5 minutes times 500 degrees per pound. So 25 minutes for a 5-pound steak, and then turn off the oven for 2 hours and bring it out. And then, let it rest for a minute or two and then slice in. It's beautiful, super simple, super easy way to do. No brainer. All I got to do is remember your timer.
I'm in. So what are your thoughts on how to cook tomahawk indoors? Because I haven't been able to do a tomahawk and do a good job with that sucker indoors. What's the best way to cook one of those puppies?
That you could do it in the broiler in the oven, depending on how good of an oven you have. Honestly, I get a lot of tomahawks sent to me. I mean, I'm kind of, because I've become such a beef advocate, I get ranchers literally sending me their steaks. And a lot of times they'll send me a big old tomahawk, and the bone is like, 12 inches long on the end there, and it won't fit in my pans. It won't fit in my grills. And so I just go in the garage with a saw and saw the bone sometimes. So it's kind of like, you still got all the meat, but I make it fit. So, I mean, you do what you got to do sometimes, the bone is cool and all, and it's fun. It makes a fun picture. But I mean, honestly, I cook most of them outdoors, so I don't run into that issue. But if, like that 17-inch pan, you probably can get most of the tomahawk in there, and you just have the bone kind of hanging off the end. Yeah. Which you don't really care if the bone is all the way cooked on the end. You just kind of use it as a handle anyway. So you might be able to get away with it in a big enough pan.
All right, I'll give that a shot. Well, Shawn, I got to say, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Um, if folks want to buy your book, we're just going to send them to Amazon. I guess that's the best place. Go to Amazon,
Yeah, I
wherever
mean
you
that's how you
buy
can
the
get it.
book,
Yeah, yeah.
The Carnivore Diet. But tell us,
Give Bezos some money.
yeah, yeah. There you go. Yeah. So there's a new company called Public Square, and they're supporting all the non-woke pro-freedom companies out there, and they're selling some books. I'm looking at putting some of our books over there as well. Um, we wrote a book, myself and my buddy Wayne Allen Root. I don't know if you know Wayne Allen Root. They call him the Trump of Las Vegas. So we wrote this book. It's called The Great Patriot Boycott Book. It's a list of non-woke companies to support. Got Donald Trump's attention. He posted about it on Truth Social. I thought that was kind of cool. And then we'd written The Great Patriot Boycott Book, which was all those companies that you were talking about that are crazy and trying to mess us up. So these are the ones not to buy from. So we're really big fans of making sure the right kind of companies get our support. These ranchers that send you beef, if you send me a couple of their names, we'll include them in the show notes. But tell me a bit more about your various websites, how people can find out about them, buy your services, join your groups. Let's make sure we get all that in there too.
Yeah, I mean, the one I'm most excited about is obviously Rivero.com, but that's limited to the U.S. So I don't know if your audience is, U.S. or
Mostly American,
Canadian,
believe it or not. Even though I'm Canadian,
okay.
70% of my listeners are in America. I'm the most American Canadian you're ever going to meet, brother.
Got it. Okay. And I honestly, sometimes I felt really sorry for Canada going through COVID. I mean, I was like, my gosh, it was like a communist country in my view.
Well, we had our truckers, and they stood up tall and strong. And
I saw that. And I think they did a good job, and they probably were instrumental in some of the events that happened subsequent. Even though Trudeau was claiming victory, but it was a hollow victory. I think they actually did more. I think they did what they wanted to do.
They did.
But yeah, I mean, so Rivero.com, all 50 states in the United States were licensed. So if you need a doctor that is, low carb, keto, carnivore friendly, that's not going to just want to push drugs on you and really work with you, that's where you can go. We just, on Rogan, we got another couple thousand people signed up for it. So we got a lot of patients coming in, which is great. That's great. So hopefully we'll be very successful and expand this out to the level I think it needs to go. There's another website called carnivore.diet. This is for people doing carnivore that want to jump on and just, meet other people, and I'm there every day. And then, I've got some social media. Obviously I'm on, Instagram at Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER 1967. I'm on what was formerly Twitter, is now X, at SBakerMD. I've got a YouTube channel, I know still, even though I got suspended like 5 or 6 times through the pandemic. So that's Shawn Baker MD. And then I do have a Rumble account, Shawn Baker MD, but I don't post as much there. I just had a hard time uploading that platform. It just would not. It was just so slow, partly because I'm on Starlink and I don't have a good signal. So it makes it hard for me to upload some stuff. I don't have a True Social account, but I know I did Rumble, and I did, what was the other one for a while? Anyway, I'm Gab. I think I was on Gab for a little bit, but I'm mostly on the other ones we mentioned. And yeah, that's where to find me. So, and of course, I'm going to be spreading the word pretty hard this year. I mean, I'm excited because I was on Rogan complaining about lack of funding and research on our diet, particularly from the beef industry, which stands, I think, to benefit significantly from it. And now I cannot tell you how many people have reached out to me like, hey, let's talk about this. Let's see if we can find some studies for you. So I'm excited about, getting, because I think there needs to be some science on this stuff, some more science rather, because there have been a few studies, but then we need more.
I'm going to connect you with Tony Martin. I think Tony's a good guy, and he is really dialed into all kinds of studies. That's his kind of thing. He's citing them all the time on his podcast, and he's a good fellow, and you should go on his show if he'll bring people on. I think it's usually him talking about stuff, but he's a good guy. You should get connected. I'd like to connect you with my buddy Wayne Allen Root. He's got a TV show on the Real America's Voice TV. It's called Wayne Allen Root's America's Top 10. He's got the distinction of being the journalist that's interviewed Donald Trump more than any other journalist, 13 times on his show. And he brings people like you on. So if you'd like to go on his show, he's got a pretty good audience.
Yeah.
I'll connect you with his producer, Andrew Paul, who's a friend of mine. Brother, I really appreciate the time you spent with me. God bless you. Thanks for coming on the show, and Please come back anytime. Please keep doing what you're doing. And I want to tell you this very sincerely. I said this to all my Jewish friends after they were attacked by Hamas in Israel, because one of them posted online, your Jewish friends are not okay. And I called him and I said, how are you, man? And he said, I'm good. I said, no, really, man. I saw what you posted online. How are you? And then he told me the truth. And I said, look, I'm here if you need me for anything. And then what he said he wanted to be introduced to some podcasters and journalists. And I know a lot of those guys, so I did that. And I'm telling you this, Shawn, we just met each other. We've only spent an hour together, but I consider you a fellow warrior and a fellow brother in spreading the cause of freedom. Anything you need, anyone you want to be introduced to, if you're pissed off at somebody one day and you want to just scream and yell at somebody who's going to listen, I'm happy to do that. I run a men's group. I do that for the men. I'm one of your brothers right now, man. So rock and roll. Thank you very much for being
here. I appreciate the support, and likewise, everything I can do, let me know. And thank you very much. And anyway, I got to go press on and keep the fight up. We all got to keep fighting, man. It's worth it for sure.
100%, man. 100%. And if you're ever coming to Canada, let me know. And I don't know what part of the world you live in, but if I'm ever coming down that way, I'd love to meet you in person and shake your hand.
Yeah, I might be up in Montreal, Montreal in the spring. So we'll see.
Okay. My brother lives there.
Thanks,
so
man.
Maybe I'll come visit you when you're there if the schedules work out. You take good care of yourself, brother. God bless you. God love you. Keep up the good fight. Listener, Shawn Baker, this man is the real deal. He's a warrior for freedom. He's an advocate for my favorite food, steak. And like me, he loves ribeyes. What's there not to like about this dude? He's a man among men. Make sure that you support him. You go to Rivero.com. If you're in the United States, if you got friends in the United States, send them over there. Go to carnivore.diet and go to Amazon or anywhere else you buy books and pick up a copy of his book, The Carnivore Diet. This book has the potential to change your life. I don't say this often about things, but this is something that's affected me very powerfully in a very personal way. You know about my journey of losing 58 pounds this year? Shawn Baker, Tony Martin, these two men, they have a lot to do with it, so make sure you take advantage of this. Until next time, goodbye.
This episode has been brought to you by eCircleAcademy.com, the proven system to add 6 to 7 figures a year to your thought leader practice.